It looks so good every time.
And we have arrived. Welcome, everybody, to another exciting installment of the Cape and Cowl Comics never-ending book club show. That's right. This is the book club show that never ends, except it usually does after like an hour, but it always comes back. I am Cody, a.k.a. the Mutant Menace, and I am joined today by my lovely usual co-hosts, but there's also a face here that some people may not recognize, and we are very excited about that. First things first, I'm joined by Kevin, a.k.a. Kevbotzilla. How you doing tonight, Kevin?
Doing great. Thanks for asking.
Oh, but of course, I'm also joined by Aton, a.k.a. Aton Manhoff of Cape and Cowl Comics. What's going on?
Not too much. Very excited. Been looking forward to this particular episode for weeks. So very excited to be here.
Yes, same. And of course, we have our special guest tonight that we're so stoked on. This is David D.B. Andry, writer of RESONANT, the book we have been so stoked to talk about. How you doing tonight, David? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Woo.
Excellent. Some people in the chat. Hey, Michael. Welcome.
Michael.
Hey, what's up, Mr. Rowe? Welcome to the party.
Welcome.
Starting off with a resonant rocked comment. That's a good start.
I appreciate that.
So we read your book, Resonant, for our book club this week. Resonant from Vault Comics, which we spoilers for when conversation gets hot and heavy. We loved, but before we get too deep into the book, we have to get deep into the writer.
Ooh. I don't know if I'm ready to get deep.
That's an odd way of saying that. We need to get deep into the mind and heart.
David, welcome to our lives on a daily basis.
I stretched a little bit, but if we're doing that, I need to stretch a little bit more.
Limber up.
Yeah.
David, we've known each other probably for close to 5 years now.
Yeah.
Because you and your crew wandered into the store one day from your comic making collective.
Yep.
And you guys had this big tub of comics. And if I remember correctly, I just bought a handful of them. I was like, these are sweet.
Yeah.
Sold. Take some. And then we've seen each other on and off at different cons and stuff since then.
Yeah, so I had 5, 6, 7 years ago now, started self-publishing with some friends here in Sacramento, Christopher Alvarez and Hannah Moore, and we formed Ghost Thunder Collective. So we have like support when we're doing cons and people to like be creative with. Like me and Chris and me and Hannah have collaborated on different stories and done little mini comics and full comics, and so we had a bunch of self-published stuff. We're like, here, we know you have a self-published section. Buy a bunch of our stuff.
Yeah. Well, it worked out well. In fact, we probably need more because that was like 5 years ago. So I'm pretty sure we need more. Reordering is something I'm still learning about 5 hours in, or 5 years in. But before you start your collective, clearly there's a comics history. And as much as I want to know about Resonant in that story, I want to know how we got here from the very beginning. Do you remember like your first comics and where they came from? And
I remember the very first comic I opened up and looked at. And it was in 1986, and it was a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And a new kid had transferred to my school, and he brought this comic book out, and I'm like, what is this? And, I flipped through that first one and that was it. I was hooked. Luckily I grew up in Manteca, and we had an amazing comic book shop called Comic Dreams. And, basically went from never reading a comic to being there on a nearly daily basis.
Yes.
And they would have like a comic book collectors club, and they would have a meeting like after hours every like once a month on Saturdays or something like that. And you'd have like a 50% off back issue sale. And I would come in with paper like grocery bags and fill up like 150 comics. It was all like Alpha Flight and Firestorm
Oh, we lost David. Good, because I didn't want him giving any customers any ideas that they could show up with grocery bags.
No.
All right, I'm sure he'll be right back. It seemed like his connection was a little weak because at least on my screen, his sound wasn't matching up with his mouth movement. So
I see.
He'll hop right back in.
Yeah, well, I want to take this time really quick to let everyone know we're seeing your questions and comments for David. We're definitely going to go ahead and be filling that into the chat so you guys can get your questions in for sure. So don't worry. Have no fear.
He's back.
I think I'm back. I may be having internet issues.
That's all right. We will fight through. It's not the first time we've run into internet issues.
Yeah. No.
Little show.
Far from it.
So it was Ninja Turtles. And how old were you when you got that? You said like fourth grade? Or something like
so that was like sixth grade. And
okay.
So, yeah. So like, I think that summer, my friend and I tried to make a comic book. And it was called Assorted Animal Assassins. Not at all a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles ripoff at all. And then, it just kind of was into comics all the way through the 90s and the Image explosion. I submitted to a couple of the Wildstorm talent searches. I still have my rejection letters. And then, got into college and ran out of money. So I stopped collecting comics for about 10 years. Just didn't have literally any money.
That was going to be my question, if you had any lapses or anything.
2000, when was that? So it'd probably be 95 through 2005, somewhere around there.
And have you always leaned then towards like the independents, or do you have in all those many short boxes behind you? Is there like an Avengers run or Blue Beetle?
Being a kid of the 90s, a comic collector of the 90s, I think I always gravitated towards indies and Image, at that time. And probably a little bit more Marvel, and Spider-Man was one of my favorites. I was always the guy that collected the comic that was going to get canceled. So it was like Checkmate, and then that got and Alpha Flight, which would get canceled like 10 different times, and like Firestorm. So whatever. I was kind of known for a while at the comic book shop as the Kiss of Death, because as soon as I started collecting a comic, it would get canceled.
That's too funny.
Yeah. So these are only all these short boxes that you see are only from the last 10 years. Everything that was earlier is gone. I got rid of all that entire collection at one point when I needed some money. So everything's gone, and this is all just recent. Last 10 years about.
What brought you
down? I still have like 15 short boxes of 90s shit at my house too. So.
Oh my god, I got a garage.
Yeah, I couldn't give that stuff away when it was time to get rid of it. They're like, no, we don't need any more Youngblood 4s. We're good.
And I'm pretty sure I have like 6 copies of Youngblood 1 and like 5 copies of the Wildcat trilogy. I mean,
you had to buy multiple copies, right?
Yeah, one to stock, one to rock.
Yeah, it was investment. See, here's what I did. I had an older brother, and I would read his copy and keep mine sealed up, so mine never saw air. And I would always like rough his comics up. I'm like, mine are going to be more valuable. Right there. Yeah,
that's smart.
Genius.
So I'm curious. So if you had this 10-year break, was it the whole time? Because you said you ran out of money, you're a college student, all that stuff. But the whole time, are you like missing comics, or you just you're not really thinking about it? And then is there something that like brings you back? Is there something you heard about that brought you in, or a friend or something like that?
Yeah, even during that time, I was talking about comics with friends, and I would even go to San Diego Comic-Con. I went to college down in San Diego, and for like 7 years, I went to Comic-Con without being a comic book collector, and just wandering around and looking at cool stuff. So I was always like on the fringes, but super duper poor. So it didn't, I could never jump back in, because I knew once I was back in, it was going to be trouble. And then, so my friend Sean Kirkham had always gotten me tickets to get into Comic-Con. He had pro badges for some reason. Then you get grandfathered in pro badges forever. And the last year that he he was no longer grandfathered in, we were like, do we want to skip this year? It's like we didn't really have a plan to go. And our friend Cena Grace, who was Robert Kirkman's editor on The Walking Dead and Invincible, called up Sean because they knew each other. They both lived down in LA, and said, hey, do you guys want to come down and work the Skybound booth? We're starting our own booth and we need some booth workers. And it was right when the show was announced, that it was that first year before the show came out in October, that it had just got announced, and it was all over Comic-Con. That was like the year of the Walking Dead.
I remember that.
Yeah. And so leading up to that, I knew I was going to work the booth, and I didn't want to sell something I didn't know anything about. So I went and bought all the trades, all the books. I read all of Walking Dead up until whatever was published, and I read all of Invincible. And that was kind of that was it. You give me the taste, and I was back. I jumped in like 2 feet. Went, as soon as that con was over, went back to my local comic book shop here in Sacramento, Big Brother, and started a pull list and said, stack me up. Let's go.
I'm back, baby.
Yeah.
I forgot that I'd see you at the Skybound booth. I picture you at the booth with your stuff.
Yeah.
But that's some of the smaller like local cons, and then at the big one, I always forgot, and I never knew why you were there.
Yeah. I don't know why I was there. I don't know why I was there either. Yeah. No, it was wild. I mean, that was like just a total roller coaster ride. We had never done cons before, like other than going as a fan, and then you're helping run this huge booth. And my friend Sean kind of turned into one of Skybound's first employees, basically their second employee behind Cena Grace, and has been with the company since about our first year, after our first year of volunteering. And he was their director of business development, and now he's one of the VPs of something. I don't know. They all have
like
titles.
The face of Skybound, really.
He is. He's the big clutch. He's the clutch of Skybound. So, yeah, and him knowing Cena from, I think Cena worked at Heidi Ho Comics in LA, and they knew each other from there, and that's kind of where it all came from. And so I worked. This was like I was single. I didn't have anything else to do with my life, and so I just worked cons constantly. I mean, we would do like New York, and we went to WonderCon and when it was down in LA and Long Beach and, San Diego every year. We went and did Fan Expo Toronto one year. It was amazing. Did C2E2. So on the Skybound dime, I've been to all these different conventions. So that was kind of what helped me get into writing comics, because I've always written, for myself and never really finished anything, and started talking to writers and process and getting to know artists and seeing that the barrier to entry for comics is not that hard. It's not that high. You pay an artist, you pay a letterer, and you write a story. And then, we have local print shops, a really nice local print shop here in Sacramento that you can print out your comic, for a couple of bucks, $4 or $5 maybe if it's color and stuff like that, but enough that you can kind of get your feet wet in it and learn the craft and then work those small conventions and start to make connections. I saw my self-published stuff as kind of like my resume and my business card. So
yeah,
it was always like part of the plan to kind of hone my craft and then move my way up.
How many? So now we're on to like the comics you're making and the stuff that you're doing on your own, and you're doing part of your collective and all this stuff. And how many? What were those stories that you did? That you were working on yourself.
Yeah. So the first thing I really wrote and produced and like self-published was a story called Last Supper. And it was, a story about a guy and a girl who meet and have one night together. And the guy's planning on killing himself that night. And it was kind of supposed to be his last night on Earth. And then, because of this connection, he has to decide whether he's going to go through with it or not. And that really just came from, my divorce and working through some stuff. So it was kind of like my free Well, not free because I paid for a lot of stuff on it, but it was like therapy, but cheaper, you know? Because it was like, it was the first draft was very dark. I mean, it was like, this is some dark stuff. And what I learned through writing it, that it was the two characters, because the girl's trying to convince them, hey, you know, this is, you know, going through a bad patch is not the end. You got to kind of get back on that horse and try again. It was basically me arguing with myself where I was with my life at that time, you know, where you're like, after a breakup, you're pissed off at relationships and you're like, I'm never going to do that again. So kind of through the process of writing that comic, I kind of got a little bit better. And so the ending didn't feel right. And actually I sent it to Cena, and he's like, this doesn't, he kind of pointed out that this ending doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like what you're actually trying to say. And so it became a more hopeful ending. And then I ended up, you know, selling that and working cons and getting some pretty good responses from it. And then I made 3 more issues in the same series. And so it became a story of this relationship from beginning to end. So the second book was 5 years after the first, and the third book was 5 years after the second. And then the last book was like 10 years after that one. So I kind of encapsulated the relationship from beginning to end and just really used it as a way to work through some psychological issues.
That sounds really, really cool. Who published that, or what was?
I did. That's
that
me.
was just you?
Yeah. So it's now under one volume. So, you know, being raised Catholic, they all ended up having religious titles, and everyone would ask, "Is this a religious book?" And I'm like, "No." And so I retitle it The Wild and Certain, and it's in one volume now. I don't print the singles anymore because it's too expensive.
Yeah.
But I have the trade. It's basically a trade size, 100 and something pages of like just my self-published comics.
That's awesome.
And then I did with some friends. We did a couple of volumes of an anthology, just a Ghost Thunder Presents anthology, and there's 4 different stories in the first one and 5 in the second one, and I wrote them all, and then friends illustrated them. So we did 2 volumes of that. Yeah. And then I did I think the only, you know, some other short stuff. And then I did an Iron Circus anthology. I pitched to an Iron Circus anthology and got accepted into that. So I have a short in the FTL Y'all anthology.
That's rad, man.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
So that's kind of the CV right there.
Yeah.
I'm interested a little bit about the grind of the self-publish, or I say a grind, but I don't know because I've never had the courage to do my own thing. But I know I've seen you guys and other friends work the cons with your own book, and you're in a line of a lot of people with their own book, and
yeah,
it's got to be it's got to be a hell of an experience doing that.
It is, but you know, it's kind of like that's. For us, for like me and Christopher especially, that's kind of where we get our juice, because Christopher kind of worked a couple of cons with Skybound too, so he knows what it's like to sell something that's super popular that people are like getting in fights to get exclusives of, you know, and when it translates to something that you created and that someone likes, and then they come back the next year and say, hey, do you have more of this? I really liked I remember this book that I bought from you last year and I really liked it. Do you have another one? I mean, that's I don't do drugs, but that's like better than anything I can imagine.
That's the good stuff.
You know, that's like the juice. Yeah. And you're like, that kind of powers you to kind of, you know, I have this vivid memory of watching 13th Warrior in the theaters. And you come out of that movie and you're like, we just wanted to play some D&D and kill some stuff. Like that, you're just all pumped up. And like, that's what cons would do. Cons would just kind of get you pumped up to make more stuff.
Yeah.
You know? Awesome. And I mean, I've been really lucky. I've had great collaborators, like people that are really super cool to work with, who are like just super generous and willing to like, you know, just do their very, very best for a self-published book. And so like, that's really important to have a little community too, where people you can rely on. Like Christopher does like all the covers for pretty much for almost everything Ghost Thunder does. He does all the production specs. He puts the PDF together. I literally can turn on the computer and I can write a Word document. That's the extent of my technical ability.
Same.
Yeah. So if I didn't have like that as a partner and like other people that can help me out with this technical stuff, I'd be lost. You know. So get yourself a little tribe and sally forth.
Who are some of your favorite collaborators that you've worked with over the years?
Oh, I mean, so I got Chris and Hannah from Ghost Thunder. My artist for my entire self-published run, Paul Schultz. He's out of Canada. He's like an art teacher, just amazing dude. Tim Daniel, who has done logos for me, who I'm co-writing basically everything else for the rest of my career with.
Hell yeah.
All the people on Resonant, Jason Wordy and Skylar Patridge and Darren Bennett and Adrian Wassel from Vault. Like everybody's been like super rad. Like I can't imagine. Like I honestly, have had very few negative experiences. I've been pretty lucky with, people doing what they say they're going to do and not like ghosting and like being good communicators and stuff. And that's kind of like, you hear a lot of horror stories.
Yeah. We've got a gentleman who shops at our store who's a Vault guy. And we always hear great things about them. And it just shows in the comics, the quality they put out consistently and the chances they take on different content is pretty impressive.
Yeah, so, I was on a call last night with Tim and some collaborators on a future title that's coming up. And yes,
let's tell us more.
Well, it's somewhat been announced. Vault did their stealth announcements at the beginning of the year this year, where they just kind of announced like the names.
Yes,
so that's exciting. That's been like me and Tim's next book has been announced. And we were talking with Kurt Michael Russell, who is definitely going to do the color on that book. And him as a colorist who gets to work with a lot of different editors and see a lot of different people. He said, Vault is the cool thing about them is they love comics and they are comic book people. And and as weird as that is, it's not always the case that every publisher is there for the comic,
Yeah.
And Vault, while they want to do other stuff and they want to expand it, the comics always come first,
That's great. Yeah.
I love the Vault guys so much. I mean, the customer he's mentioned is Dave Disanaika, your
our PR guy. Yeah.
PR guy and just one of the best people there is. And
he's awesome.
I love the Wassels and I love Tim. Where I go to the conferences like Comic Pro and stuff, and I just I end up just latching on to the I should be networking and meeting people, and it's I just want to go have lunch with the Wassels and hang out with these nice mountain men.
Yes, these extremely handsome, rugging mountain men. I'm not at all intimidated to hang out with them.
I think that's it. I think they're just beautiful, and I'm just I want to hang out with these beautiful men. And, I met Tim at one, and he's great too.
Yeah, and Tim was one of the volunteers. Well, here's the thing. Here's a good example of what kind of person Tim Daniel is. He was at the Skybound booth to hang out and not work. He was just there. He did a lot of their graphic design and logos and T-shirts and stuff. He had been working with Skybound for a while, and he was just there to kind of hang. And he decided just to jump in and help us out with stuff. And he basically worked the entire con instead of hanging out like he wanted to. So I've known Tim since that very first Skybound convention in San Diego. And so we've been friends since. And he's always since then, he was always one of the first people I send scripts to and say, hey, Tim, is this any good? And he'll always be super supportive. And he's honestly has been a dream collaborator, has no ego when we're talking about story and stuff. And he's what if this happens? I'm he's okay, we'll throw that out. Let's do this. The good thing is that guy's he's like a machine gun of ideas, and you throw one out and he'll come up with 10 more. And so it has been the easiest, smoothest, most natural thing for us to kind of work together. And I'm, you know, I'm a little bit probably too like arrogant about my own writing to be, and I'm like, oh, I don't want anybody to change anything. And then I'm like,
Good.
and then Tim goes, what if we did this? I'm like, shit, that's so much better. Okay, fine. So it's, but so Tim and I had known for each other for like 10 plus years, and it was only in May of this last year that he's like, hey, why don't we do something together? I'm like, okay. And we had one phone call, and 3 hours later we had completely blocked out a series. I mean, it was like,
wow.
It was so easy and so smooth, and we just kind of naturally fell into this rhythm of like me doing some work and sending it to him, and him doing the work and sending it back to me, and like I've never worked this fast or this well, like ever. And I can see like my level elevating because what he's adding, and hopefully it's the same going his way,
That's perfect.
Awesome.
That's the ideal collaboration right there.
Yeah.
So is Tim how is that connection with Tim how Resonant ends up at Vault, or have you pitched it to them, or is that what happened?
So a little bit of history. The Wassels had a company, CME, Creative Mind Energy, before Vault, and they had self-published within that publishing house some of Adrian's work, and I think some of Damien's work, and Nathan Gooden, his work, and I met them at their very first convention, which was a WonderCon in LA. They were right next to the Skybound booth, and I walked over there, and every single book had gorgeous quality and amazing art, and I'm like, this is super professional stuff. And I'm like, how long you guys been doing this? And I think it was probably Adrian that I talked to. And he's like, oh, this is our first show. I'm like, this is ridiculous. You can't be this good this fast. And so I bought like all their books that they had at that first show. And I'm like, and I've been like stalking and watching them since then. And just so happened that they're from Missoula, Montana, where Tim lives. And so they started to do Vault together. And I'm like, hey, Tim, I know these guys are awesome. Do you think I could pitch to them? And Tim was just like, I'm sure, like a little gnat in Adrian's ear for like, it was a couple of years ago at Emerald City, and just like, like, dude, let's try pitch to you. Come on. And I somehow, and if you guys have been to Emerald City, it's insane. And like the demands on your time and how many people that want to connect with you is, you can never meet with everybody you want to meet with, even if you just met with people all day long.
Yeah.
And I got to have dinner with Adrian, and David Boer was there, because David Boer was doing a book with Vault at that time, Powerless. And I had 5 pitches. I narrowed it down to 2, and Resonant was the second thing I pitched them.
Wow.
And I pitched them at dinner after a beer, after I chugged that beer down super fast. And it was kind of like, go from there, but without Tim, like, nagging, no one's ever said this, but I'm 100% sure they never would have listened to me if it wasn't for Tim nagging away. So yeah, I totally owe like Resonant to Tim, first probably.
Nice to have friends in high places,
Yeah.
That's
The thing
good.
is, you start off with friends in low places, and then hopefully you guys get up to a higher place together.
You got to cover the whole spectrum, You need friends everywhere.
Oh man, one day I'd like to have friends. So I see that in the comments, it looks like people have read, which is great. I see some questions popping up. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into Resonant itself. I've been so excited to talk with you about it because I have a lot of thoughts. Something that I love, for those uninitiated, for people who haven't read it, Resonant is essentially the story of one family struggle to survive in this new world. It's almost post-apocalyptic in its tone. But we are experiencing waves that kind of unleash inner anger, acting on your darkest impulses, essentially. And these waves are unexpected. They come at kind of unpredictable intervals, and kind of we lose our inhibitions and we act on our darker impulses. Something that instantly struck me about this concept was I've long maintained that the scariest story is the one about the human capacity for evil and darkness. This is the kind of stuff that actually scares me. So right away, I was hooked with kind of how frightening this was about to be. But something that strikes me now, because I was unaware of The Last Supper, one of your earlier projects, but there seems to be a connective thread of a lot of psychological tones and kind of looking inward at how we deal with things like our darker impulses, almost like our shadow selves and what we might be tempted to do and don't act on. And something that really struck me about this book as I was reading it was that we're introduced to more characters and more factions of people, and each group almost has their own way of dealing with what happens when the waves come. And this became really interesting to me because then I was realizing this is almost a book about how we deal with our darkness, and how we find either relief, reprieve, or how we hide from it. We see things like the main character, Paxton, I believe that might be their last name, Paxton, in the book.
No, it's his first name. Yeah.
It's his first name. Okay. So Paxton kind of like seeks that, calm and comfort inward. He kind of becomes one with the world that is, he tells himself it's full of nothing. He kind of opens his mind to it. But then we see characters like the kind of the religious group that we find who almost
congregation.
Yeah, they find their own way of dealing with it. Is it feels like repression. It feels very repressed, and it feels almost too controlling and kind of selfish almost, because there's events in this book where you find out that they're not as helpful to other people as they kind of seemed like they would be. So I guess I just wanted to ask you how much of Resonant was planned in your head as something that would, if I'm on the money, I might be completely off the mark, but how much of it was planned for like having people coping with that versus did you start with the idea for the waves, or did you start with wanting to tackle a story about how one might deal with some of their inner darkness?
It started a lot with the waves, but also, those intrusive thoughts, and like, do bad thoughts make you a bad person? And kind of as the world developed, you just kind of think, how do people deal with stress now? People can lash out and be aggressive towards other people. People can turn to religion. People can just go nuts, or people can try to stay close to their family and stay calm and do things like that. So, the root was a couple of things. The root for Resonant was a couple of things. One was that intrusive thoughts, or what it really started with was high place phenomenon. And that's the feeling of wanting to jump if you're like leaning over a balcony or driving on a bridge and thinking about steering off that bridge. And it's called the call to the void in French. And so that kind of, that back in the 90s, I wanted to have a supervillain that had like big pouches and spikes that would do that to people, make them follow there. And I'm like,
wow.
So, and a good idea will hopefully stick with you forever. So that kind of just hung out. And then I started thinking about separation and my own kind of fear of having children. I don't have kids, and because of a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons I have a special needs younger brother who I saw my parents really struggling with, and that impacts a lot of my writing as well. So I had this fear of having kids. What would be the worst thing if I had kids? Well, probably being away from them and trying desperately to get back. Okay, what does that feel like? And it felt like kind of like the Odyssey. And I'm like, okay, well, let me do my version of the Odyssey. And so then I kind of mashed that all together, and it just kind of fell into place.
I was going to say it's the Odyssey. When you boil it down, it's about a guy who wants to get home and see his kid.
Yeah, and when he gets there, he doesn't want to stay. So he's kind of a jerk,
Yeah.
And it's not obvious in the book because the reader doesn't have to know everything I know. But Paxton's not a perfect father, and it's not something that he felt natural with, and so he has a lot of guilt about not being a perfect father and having it be something that he had to really work on. So he almost overcompensates, with this desire to get back to his kids. And so, it's Paxton has a lot of my fears of what scares me the most about being responsible for another human being. And so, yeah, it it came a lot from like all those kind of feelings, and then just looking at society and looking at the pandemic is kind of a good example. Like, what did people do? How did people deal with stress?
Yeah.
Yeah,
they either get into themselves, they get into other people, they get into religion. This has been a time of habits.
Yep. Yeah. And and the kids, what I like about here, I'm gonna like pat myself on the back here. Like, what I like about the kids is the kids are kids that were like born in Tornado Alley or whatever, and they just grew up with this threat all the time, but they're still kids. And the feedback from other people is that's kind of come through. So I'm glad that's kind of coming through. That Paxton's a person that had a normal life until the apocalypse happened, and these kids are born within it. So they're looking at it from two different sides. Paxton sees what life used to be and knows that this is wrong, and the kids are like, this is just life. This is just what we have to deal with.
Right.
That it's so right on, dude. I mean, as a parent, for a few days away from completing a year in this pandemic, and having a 5-year-old who, like, I'm not sure completely remembers pre-pandemic,
right?
So like masks are like, watch TV show, and she's watching Full House from 30 years ago, and is pretty freaked out that they're not wearing masks.
Right?
They're too close.
So that comes through really well, and that idea of overcompensation too, I think, is like super on the money with parents who at least want to give the impression of going above and beyond for their kids at all times, at like the expense of being their own person, having their own wants and desires and stuff. And that's just like that. You hit that on the head.
Yeah. And there's hints of it. If people kind of go and reread, there's hints of it when Paxton, towards the end of this first trade, when Paxton's on the island, he kind of falls into this rhythm of violence and fighting. The others that are coming to Honcho's island, and you could almost see him just kind of letting everything go and just staying with that life. And so it's, he's a little bit of a flawed. He's probably a great father, and but no one's ever perfect. So
yeah. Well, going back to how people cope with darkness, there's an interesting character of Ma and his the blind, almost leading the blind. But there was kind of like that group of people seems to me like people who can't deal with the darkness and kind of submit almost to someone that they're just going to let someone take the wheel. That's a very interesting set of characters there that I'd like to talk about. But really what I wanted to circle back when you were talking about Paxton kind of resorting to violence and kind of settling in. It's funny because there's reflections in Ty almost when he's in the congregation and, he's run away from Beck and he's at this point going to take his own journey. And I remember there was a panel it was kind of funny because he's standing there as the congregation's being overrun by Ma and the followers. And the congregation's just like, whoa, this too shall pass. Like, go ahead and let them. And Ty is just kind of standing there. And there's a line where he's like, we should probably fight. And that was just like reflections of Paxton showing in him like, no, let's do this.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as Ma, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna bring it. Ma, here's I got little nuggets of insight. Ma was basically going to be a throwaway character. That was going to be his one scene.
Oh, wow.
Him walking along the road. So what I wanted for the reader starts with this journey and it looks idyllic and peaceful. You start with Beck and then you realize, hey, she doesn't have a leg. Okay, maybe something funky's going on. And then Paxton starts to journey forth from his secluded enclave that he's created for his kids. And I wanted like the first sort of people, he meets the skinny man on the road and then he sees Ma and his travelers. I wanted the reader to start getting more and more unsettled with how messed up the world is outside of their little bubble. So Ma was really there to kind of like shock the reader and go, "What the hell is going on?" And then I'm like, wait, this dude's too cool. I got to bring him back and do more stuff.
Yeah,
with him.
I'm glad you did. I almost felt like it would just be in passing because it is such a memorable visual. But I do love that he came back. And while we're on the topic of Ma, we got a good question from our friend Mike Rowe. He says, book question: the Ma name evokes a hunger and almost an abyss. Did you have other names in mind before the Ma?
No, Ma was always Ma. Ma was always Ma. Yeah. And we may never get to the reason he's named Ma, and that's okay because I'll know it. And then once the series is over, I can tell you guys about it. But I've said on other podcasts, and this is not a secret, that I would love to go past 10. I don't think it's going to happen just because of comics and how comics are. But if we get to 15 or 20, you'll definitely see a little bit of the reason Ma is called Ma.
Yeah, that's fabulous too. And yeah, I mean, where it's going, I just oops, lost him again. We'll wait till he's back.
I'll tell you guys why he's named Ma. Their name Ma. Let me let you know. No, I don't actually know. Maybe we'll get a Ma spin-off series.
It's probably because the priest dude's name is Paw, and I don't know.
I was going to say, it sounds like mommy issues.
Sorry, Ma got me.
Peepaw.
There you go.
Ma got me.
Trust in Ma. We trust in Ma. In Ma we trust.
That's right.
Yeah, but I was going to say, I love to see this go further because, I mean, I know Kevin and I just caught up with the 3 issues of singles. I think we're up to 8 right now.
Yep.
And man, did it go in an awesome direction. And we're seeing more congregations of people, not the congregation, but more groups of people kind of acting on how they're going to deal with the darkness. In the latest issue, we found, spoilers for people that only want to talk about the first volume, I'm sorry, but I have to bring this up. We're introduced to a new group of characters that they kind of tackle the darkness by not submitting, but acting on impulses. And they act on impulses kind of regularly. And this spoke to me. It's kind of funny because this made me think of being younger. And I grew up in a super liberal household, and I grew up on horror movies. I watched horror movies all the time. It's my favorite genre. And I had friends who were not allowed to ever watch horror movies. And I, was the devil on a lot of friends' shoulders. And I would throw on, A Nightmare on Elm Street because it's my favorite. And so I would kind of like show my friends that. And then these friends would just be obsessed. It's all they talked about. It's all they wanted to do. I'd be like, okay, we just watched it. And they couldn't get enough. And so I feel like I was a kid that grew up kind of indulging in this, like in these weird, dark things. And my friends who didn't understand or weren't able to look into it themselves just became like almost unhealthy in their
session. Yeah, it was the forbidden fruit. I wasn't allowed to watch Bewitched. So because of witchcraft. So there you go. If you want to have a little...
mine was Simpsons. I wasn't allowed to watch Simpsons because they were disrespectful to parents.
I wasn't either.
Yeah, that and Married with Children, which came on a 1 hour block, one after the other.
I couldn't watch that one either.
Although I did watch Married with Children much later in life, and I completely support the decision not to let children watch that show. Ted Bundy
I couldn't watch Three's Company.
Wow.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Three's Company was off limits, yeah.
That's hella funny.
I was lucky my parents didn't pay attention to anything. But I'm sure it built me as a human, and it explains a lot of why I am who I am. But parents certainly weren't watching what I was watching on TV.
All right, well, another thing. We have to talk about Honcho. Honcho is a deplorable character, but I was instantly struck by the fact that we have... Paxton ends up on this island. He's shipped off to an island run by this guy named Honcho, who is at kind of perpetual war with a clan of cannibals. And he thinks that he owns this place. The cannibals to him are these unruly rebels that keep going against his rule. But it was really striking to me to have Paxton, a black character, end up on this island with Honcho, who is a slave owner. And I felt like there was so much to get into there, so much meat to chew with how Paxton would react to such a circumstance. But I have to ask, what was the inspiration for Honcho and this guy? And he has this ability to kind of avoid the effects of the wave. And I'm not sure if this is kind of still a mystery, or if maybe he's just kind of so in tune with his inner darkness and acting on it every single day. Is there any crossover between that and the people who are exercising it in maybe, you know, more safe ways?
Honcho is the personification of white privilege. So he is born on third base and thinks he hit a triple. So he's kind of like my frat boy who is just, for some twist of fate, immune to the waves. Maybe because he's a giant douchebag all the time. Maybe because he is a sociopath and has no empathy for other people. And, you know, who knows? I don't even know. He's just immune. And, so it kind of was his like privilege.
Yeah. Well, I like what you said about him being white privilege personified, because in a lot of ways, white privilege is kind of being immune to things like consequences and, you know, things that you don't, you know, things that you wouldn't get watched for or in trouble for. He kind of dodges the trouble caused by the waves. So I think that's it's a pretty,
you know, the concept behind Honcho is he's like, you know, a rich frat guy who never had any consequences and never had to correct his behavior. And so it's 10, 15 years after college and he's still acting like a college dude. And he because of his immunity and his cruelty towards other people, he has this power in this world where he can command these people to do, you know, what he wants them to do and live an unimaginative but powerful life. You know, this is the best thing he can think of, is sitting on a beach and bossing people around. That's all he can imagine with the power that he has.
But he'll totally share his beer with you, even though he doesn't have to.
He doesn't have to. I mean, come on, he's a bro. So, you know, that's him thinking he's actually. So, you know, there's the whole saying that, you know, everyone's the hero of their own story. He's definitely the hero of his own story. He thinks he's a great guy, and he's hooking people up, and, you know, they get to live a good life as long as they do exactly what he says all the time.
Yeah, you always have to be wary around somebody in a Hawaiian print button. You always got to watch out.
Hey. I was really intrigued by Honcho. He definitely gave me like Negan vibes, who's my favorite character, like my favorite guilty pleasure character of The Walking Dead. So Honcho comes in and I'm like, this guy is going to lead to some quality shit.
Yeah.
And I was not disappointed.
No. And I would have liked to stay with Honcho for a little bit longer, but, you know, kind of wanting to get, you know, knowing I only had like 10 issues to get to the end, I couldn't linger on Honcho as long as I wanted to. But he was definitely going to be a good foil for Paxton, you know, and have a good kind of back and forth with him.
Do we end up getting some more insight into Paxton's abilities? Like why he is such a yoga master and a martial arts guru?
I only really mention it. So I like readers to be confused.
I like the mystery.
Confused enough to stay interested, not so confused that you get frustrated and put the book down. So that's really the line I'm kind of trying to walk, because in real life people don't like give exposition and explain their back history, you know.
Right.
And so when Paxton is on the boat with Doc or Claire, however you want to call her, because I call her both, he does explain a little bit that he, as a young man, you know, wanted to learn things, you know. So he kind of had that leap year between high school and college where he traveled and then just traveled for a while, just wanting to learn. And, you know, he's always been, in my mind, and I guess my mind's the one that counts. He's always been an unsettled soul. And so like he was looking for something, and he searched everywhere, you know, studied martial arts, studied yoga, you know, trained with people around the world, came back home, thought maybe if he started a family, he would feel less unsettled. So that leads to a little bit of his guilt as a father, is that like he kind of has never really found his place. And if we look at if we kind of look at the timeline, he was in that cabin before the waves started. So he had pulled himself away from society even before society went nuts. That's why he was so well prepared for it. And so that's just more of his unsettled nature, just trying to find his place in the world where he feels like he belongs. And so he pulled him and his wife away from society and established his like kind of living off the grid that served him well when the world ended.
Yeah,
he's Batman. He's got some serious Batman going on.
He's a little bit of Batman.
Yeah. I like this. Now I understand the story. See, I was lost before. No.
Yeah, and hopefully people are getting hints of it, and it makes enough sense that you'll keep reading.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to that you say that, Paxton has an unsettled soul, and that's kind of where he's coming from, because there's a character, Miki, that we meet on the island who has this uncanny ability to kind of sense when there's about to be a wave. It's almost like cat-like or animal-like before, a big storm or that kind of thing. And Miki also gets similar sensations actually from Paxton. So it's interesting thinking that, Paxton has some of this inner stuff going on. And is that what Miki's picking up on? There's a great question from Mike again. I am intrigued by Miki. They have an amazing physique. What's their inspiration? I like this question too, because Miki to me was very, they appear very androgynous in the character design. And I don't know how much of that was something that you wanted to be sure was in there and how much was Alejandro, the artist. But yeah, what was that?
The Miki was is designed to be androgynous, and the reference material that I gave Ale definitely was there. Just because I wanted them to be, I wanted to have a little bit of representation beyond what we normally see in comics. And I just I wanted them to be a little bit not your average white dude in the comic, and and Miki definitely has an ability to sense some of that. The cicadas do too. So that's, it's, some people are more sensitive than others, and Miki is a sensitive person.
That's right. I love that I just listed every animal in the animal kingdom, and I didn't mention the damn cicadas, which are actually the creatures that react to the wave.
Which are actually coming out this year. Did you plan any of this around the fact that there was a huge generational group of these cicadas about to emerge?
No, just a happy.
That is a hell of a happy coincidence.
Yeah.
Cicadas are fucking weird and super cool. So I was really stoked to see them in there.
My family's from the south, and so I have spent some time in the deep woods in Mississippi, and you just hear them. And I'll remember this forever. I was at a Boy Scout camp, and I was a counselor at a Boy Scout camp. This was right before I went to high school, so I was a young kid. And this camper had found a cicada as it's coming out of its chrysalis or whatever they come out of, and he kind of mushed the wings so it couldn't fly away, and kept it as a pet, and it would just walk around the table, and it was. I'm a California kid.
That's terrifying.
Seeing a bug that big is freaky as hell, and then you hear them. It's just this constant noise. And so initially the idea was, and it's really hard to do sound in a comic, because you can't hear it. So the idea was to have the cicadas there all the time, and then they shut up before a wave comes and then ramp up. And it just didn't work. And, Adrian kind of pointed that out when we're doing our first kind of editing call. He's like, dude, that's not going to work. Let's just have them get loud. I'm like, yeah, you're right. That's fine.
Maybe every page just had churs all over.
Yeah, that was basically it. It was constant churs, and then you were supposed to notice when they didn't show up.
When they weren't churring.
Wow, I'm like, wow, that's a really dumb idea, David. Good job.
That's cool. That would be though. That's the very cinematic idea, right? And that's just comics versus things like film. I mean, film would be great to have that kind of constant low volume, like almost him in the background, and then to have it stop, things get really unsettling. So that's almost a necessity of the medium.
I remember seeing the movie Gravity in the theaters, and
oh no! What happens in Gravity?
There's some other questions there in the comments. You think we'll be able to hit some of those before
we've got about 5 minutes or so left? We could answer.
We'll ask about the dog earlier. I would love to know.
The dog. I know. I have more points to touch on too.
And then I go silent. See, I went silent.
Was that for dramatic effect, David?
That was for dramatic effect. I did that one on purpose, guys. But no.
The drama.
Yeah. So I just remember the silence.
Sorry.
The silence in the theater when that happened was pretty dramatic. So yeah. End of story.
Okay, we had a question for you, David, about the dog. What
about
was that?
Fern?
Fern, the real hero.
Yes. Is that the question?
The question.
What's the deal with the dog? Well, she's my dog. I mean, that's the physical. I mean, that's my dog. So that was all the reference material that I gave the artist was like, hey,
Perfect.
This is my dog. If I'm going to have, this may be my one comic. Now, there's no guarantee I'm getting more, So if I get one comic, I'm putting my damn dog in it.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. And so the physical, my dog is definitely not as smart or good or brave as Fern. If the apocalypse just included laying on a couch and eating snacks, my dog would be perfect. But Fern gets to be the hero sometimes, and I've told everybody who will ask me, nothing bad is ever going to happen to Fern. I'm not going to be the writer that kills the dog. That's not happening. So there's no John Wicking here. Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Yeah.
The name for Fern actually, I found a dumped because my dog's obviously a pit bull, and when you're a pit bull owner, you kind of have to educate yourself on pit bulls because everyone will say like your dog's gonna rip people's faces off and stuff. So loving pit bulls now and being like a pit bull advocate, I actually someone dumped a pit bull in my front yard a couple of years ago, and it was obviously a mom that had just given birth, and she was curled up in a fern plant that was outside my apartment at the time. Oh. And so like trying to get her rescued and taken care of, we had called her Fern. So that's where Fern's name comes from. And her
that's great.
That's an awesome story.
Yeah, she's based on my stupid idiot of a dog.
So this is the idealistic Fern. This is the Fern.
Yes, this is if my dog would listen and do what I wanted her to do even once in my life.
That's not what dogs do. That's the natural state of a dog to listen and do
You should
stuff.
just accept it and get a couple of cats like Eitan has.
So since the pandemic, so we started with 2 dogs, me and my partner Lauren. We started with 2 dogs, and then the pandemic hit, and then we got 2 kittens, and then we got 3 chickens, and then we got 5, and then we got 5 parakeets. So if this goes on any longer, she just told me tonight it's rabbits. We're getting 2 rabbits.
Oh
Dude, what does bath time look like with 5? Was it parakeets? You said?
Yeah.
Did you just get like a squirt gun and hose them down,
She kicked me out of a room of our house, and that's the bird room now.
Wow!
Oh God,
finally, somebody beats Eitan.
I had one cockatiel, and bath time was awesome, but I couldn't imagine having more than 1 bird.
I don't mess with them. Birds scare me a little bit.
Birds freak me out. You're living with them.
She wants me to hold a chicken. I'm like, I ain't holding no chicken.
Birds have murder beaks, man. Not a fan.
Yeah, these eyes are soft.
Actually, it looks like
gonna have evil birds in it for sure.
Yeah.
Just I got a new comment. You guys can't see this, but I got a comment in the chat. It's from your dog, David. It's from Fern.
Oh.
She said that she couldn't get into Resonant. It's not realistic.
Definitely needs more snacks.
Yeah. But I wanted to add, I know we're kind of pushing time, but I wanted to make sure I made one more thought that I had reading this book. It's been fascinating reading this book for the first time in the age of coronavirus and the age of the pandemic, because so much of this book, there's a panel that stuck with me, and it's Paxton just talking to Fern one-on-one and just says, people, pup, avoid them if you can. And it was just like so timely. But also in general, a lot of these people, our main characters specifically, live in this cabin. They've kind of sequestered themselves, and a lot of people are alienating themselves for obvious reasons, right? If the wave comes and you're in a crowd, it's a much more dangerous thing because you can be hurting each other and you have less control of the situation. So it's fascinating reading a book where these characters are actually clearly yearning to be with other humans. It's natural for a human to want to be with others. So, you see characters like Ty when he first finds the kids playing, and they're playing a game and they're arguing, and he just kind of like steps forward almost instinctually because he wants to be with other kids and experience that. And that was just like super poignant for me in this time where I miss my damn friends so much, and like his natural yearning. We almost yearn for that. We resonate with each other, if you will. And the fact that these people can't, and fighting our inner darkness, it's all very, very poignant. So it's interesting to read right now.
Yeah, I mean, I thought about that a lot as I was writing. Is that as scary as the world is, people still try to find other people,
Absolutely.
And they try to find people, and you brought up a little bit about Ma. Sometimes people find somebody who's just charismatic and powerful and can tell them what to do. Right? They find a political figure they believe in, and now they're part of that tribe. Or they find a religious figure they believe in, now they're part of that tribe. And just humans tend to just be tribal. So, you can't really get rid of that. So even in the apocalypse, people are going to get together and do stuff
Absolutely.
together. So, and in general, this is my pessimistic view, I guess, of humanity. Is I guess I'm trying to say in this book that most people suck, and they are no good, and stay away from them. Just get yourself a dog.
No, for sure. I mean, even in the latest issue, we're introduced to a new group of people, like I said, and everything sure seems dandy, but I'm terrified because every time we found a group of people so far, it hasn't really worked out. So.
That's why I only hang out with you guys, my dogs. David, thank you so much for joining us tonight, man. I would love to have you on the show again in the future. This was super fun, and I feel like we just needed more time. I want to do this again.
Yeah, I can talk.
Well, we should come back definitely for volume 2. And I'm both fingers crossed that this makes it past 10 issues, man. I'm really excited to see the world that you built in a broader view. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm gonna be really happy with the end of 10. I'm getting pages in for 9 right now, and it's gonna be like 9 and 10 is the big epic action-packed climax. 8 was our one chance to kind of catch our breath basically in the whole series, and then we're gonna steamroll through 9 and 10, and it's balls to the wall crazy stuff happening.
I was gonna say it's worth mentioning that like the issue 6, the first issue right out of this volume, is insane. So if you enjoyed this volume at all, it's like a guarantee that you're going to like what's coming next. So don't stop. We've got single issues for what's out so far. Obviously, we'll be getting volume 2 when that comes in. If you read this, let us know how you liked it.
Absolutely. I don't want to run too long. Can I share one more thought?
You can share one more. Then I got to go because I got my ride waiting.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't want to keep anybody, but there was a comment here that made me think of this. There's a couple different kinds of readers, right? In comics, well, there's a lot of different kinds of readers, but there's readers that need explanations for everything and need that exposition like we were talking about. And there's other readers that can kind of jump in and enjoy the story and accept, that this is the status quo. And I think I'm in that latter camp, and I think you did it perfectly. We had a comment from Mike Rowe. I really liked that you don't explain the wave. It just is and has ramifications, and it's brilliant. And I must agree, because we're just introduced to this world. This is the way it is. And the story is character driven. And that's what I love the most about this story, is that it's about these characters. It's about, like I said multiple times, they're handling their inner evil that is manifesting itself due to this wave. And that's all you need to know. And that's I think what the story is doing, and you're doing it so well. I'm fascinated by this series. I'm a super fan officially. So thank you so much for being here. I had a lot of fun.
And David, and we want to, I think we hosted you for one of your early signings for Resonant.
Yep.
And when your next series comes out from Vault, and if the world is less scary to the point where we might be like comfortable in a room with you and other people, we'd love to have you out to the shop and celebrate that next big achievement that you've got coming, and party down.
Yeah, that'd be great. Look for it October-ish this year.
Okay.
Oh,
That's it. Mic drop.
Perfect. Well, let's wait for him to come back so we could actually say goodbye.
Yeah.
And then
I'll go ahead and close this out. Yeah, I'll close this out.
Cool.
Unfortunate disconnection.
That was perfect.
We'd like to have you out. Peace.
Right, mic drop. Boom.
Yeah, maybe not. Bye.
No, that'd be great. That'd be great. October-ish this year. So fourth quarter this year.
It's on the books.
Me and Tim Daniels' first leap into co-writing.
Nice.
So first of many.
So while we're all hiding out at home and sequestered, and we have our ropes ready to bind ourselves when the wave comes, but before it does, where can we find you on the internet, David?
Everything's at DB Andry. DB as in David Bryan, and Andry as in Andry, Andry. But just find me on Twitter, because I'm not going to be your friend on Facebook, and you're only going to see pictures of dogs and chickens on my Instagram. So find me on Twitter.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, thanks for joining. I'm at the Mutant Menace everywhere. Thank you, everybody, for watching and participating in the chat. We had a great time. And if you want to buy Resonant, it's available on the website. There'll be a link in the description as usual. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.